Hello. This kind of worked amazingly smooth today. I'm pretty happy with it. Um, so, yeah, I'm going to give everybody a second to get in here. Also, I do realize that I need to catch up on putting the videos or organizing the videos. So I'll maybe work on that later this week. Um, it's been a wild few weeks. So just busy, not anything bad, just busy. Thank you for your patience in not having the archived videos neatly archived right away. We're crunching on some stuff, so in a project I'm working on, trying to get a trailer out for it. So that's what's going on. So I'm going to give people another few seconds before I dive in to start lecturing. But I hope everybody's doing well. I can't think of any immediate housekeeping things. Again, trying to keep up on grading the best I can. I didn't get to do any today because I was making the slideshow, but I'll work on that maybe Thursday. Trying to keep up with everything, but stuff continues to look good. I'm really enjoying your artwork that you're posting in Discord. Don't be shy about posting it in Discord. Part of what makes an effective art community is sharing work and talking about each other's work, and often, offering. If you're worried about your art ability, one thing I have noticed and I've tried to foster myself with our class discussion is positivity, and I have noticed our class is very positive when talking to one another about each other's work. So I would say keep that up. It's really great, and it encourages people to be open about showing their work. And showing your work is something that you should be trying to get used to, mainly from the standpoint of what are you going to do in the real world? You're going to show your work. So keep it up. Everybody's doing a great job. So yeah, we seem to be all right, I am sending out a message. I would say if you do know somebody who is in the class and has not been attending sessions, please maybe poke them or something. Because I'm watching, I can see how many people are watching right now, and I'm seeing that it's hovering around 5, but there are definitely way more than 5 people in our class in both sessions. So I'd say, I might send out an email about this, but please, if you know people outside of the specific class, or outside of the class, please maybe nudge them and get them to start coming. I know it's tough, but this is a little worrying. So I'm gonna get into it, and anything people miss, oh shucks. So today, what we're going to talk about is art styles, and we're going to talk about X sheets. And those seem potentially not related, but they can be. And we'll talk about that. So topics for today is what do we mean by art style, and how do we look at art style in a very functional way. I think one of the things that I want you, so a lot of you are young artists, and the thing that I hear, and I've always heard young artists, especially if they are if they have not been drawing for a very long time, I hear them sort of laboriously talk about I'm trying to figure out my style, and that's a thing young artists do. and I don't want to stop people from having a style, but I also want to talk about like what it means to understand how style works and understand how to work in different styles and why you'd want to work in different styles. So, one thing that I've really enjoyed seeing online is like art style challenges where people will do like you get one square that's your style, but then people tell you like here's a bunch of styles to mimic, and you like have to look up that movie or cartoon or something and then draw in the style of that thing. And that can actually be a really good exercise for people because it is as handy as it can be to have your style. You are a better artist and a better you're more hireable if you can try different styles and adapt to different styles. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a lot about art style and how to work with art styles, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some specifics of X Sheets. We've previously looked at X Sheets, but now we're at a point where I'd like you to start as you work on some of your stuff. Start to actually plan out some movement with an X sheet. So today we are talking about style and art. But if you're talking about style, you have to talk about art and what art is. And the thing about art, and I'm going to preface this is going to sound like, to some people, this will sound actually like criticism, and it's not. I've had this slide, like parts of this slideshow. So I was working on this slideshow this morning, but I've adapted it from other slides I've given in previous years. So please, nobody think I'm talking about them, because I know we've had kind of hashed it out in terms of like drawing in the Discord. But rest assured, this section that I'm about to give has existed for like at least probably 4 or 5 years. So don't think I'm calling anybody out. This is just like stuff that I see a lot of digital artists do with art, right? So just understand that. Please understand that. But so we have to talk about art. And here's the thing. The best digital artists I know, like digital artists, have lots of traditional art experience. And those skills are highlighted far less when you talk to a digital artist or you talk to people who look at a lot of digital art. Like the language of talking about digital art somehow seems to be focused on the especially for like young artists and artist communities, it seems to be about tools, and it seems to be about your technical skill. But if you actually talk to the artist or you talk to artists, they will usually highlight elements of art. I'm not even going to say fine art, I'm going to say art, encompassing all types of art. So, the reason that my friend Daniel Silber is a very good artist, a very good pixel artist, is because he understands things like proportion and color theory and the way buildings and anatomy and mechanical things go together, and that helps him make art in many different areas, even though a lot of his professional experience is as a pixel artist. So it's not just about the tools. And like, again, and please don't take this to mean that I'm like calling anybody out, but I've just seen a lot. Remember, I've been doing this for like going on 11 years. You see this a lot where a young digital artist will think like, well, but my art style is Photoshop or my art style is Maya. But in reality, all of these things work together. And again, this is a pervasive enough thing that it's a meme. Like there's gameartstudentbullfrog.tumblr.com, and it's just a bunch of advice animal memes about like a bullfrog that is a game art student that, it's just stuff game artists say sometimes. So, not that you're all game artists, but like artist animators, digital artist animators. So like, you know, this is you need to learn these things. And again, that's why we're having you do all this drawing, so that you can get a handle on what the actual like basis of this is, so that you can then take those, understand those things, get kinesthetic feel of, again, shape, proportion, color, and then take that into your digital artworks. Because let me tell you, and again, I'm cannibalizing some old stuff here. This is from my GDC 2017 talk on actually a topic very much like this. But I've seen this in the wild teaching. You know, I've seen it where like somebody calls a teacher over and says, "Hey, come look at my cool piece of art. I'm super proud of it." And like, I guess the draftsmanship is nice, but the anatomy is kind of a nightmare. And if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about here, like the specific work, this is Captain America by comic book artist Joe Liefeld. If you don't know who he is, he's the creator of Deadpool, but you know, he's not a very good artist, and you know, by his own admission. But like, here's a picture of Captain America, and if you don't understand why that's bad, here's an example somebody made of what that would look like on Chris Evans in the movie, like what this Captain America would look like in real life. So, you know, understanding these things keeps you from making like really bad, ridiculous drawings that are you know, you don't get the dramatic effect that this is meant to evoke. So, you know, downside of our field, and there's something that I want you all to be cognizant of, because I want, you know, to help you overcome this. And it's not that anybody has a specific problem. It's that, you know, a lot of young artists I've seen do this. So, you know, the way our field works in either games or animation is that it de-emphasizes areas descended from other arts in favor of a lot of technical stuff. And, you know, we need to fix that. Even though the things that make up digital art, they have clear influences from the broader landscape of the arts, and you need to be aware of that. And being aware of that can help you develop and hone your art style, and that's super important. So, you know, for example, like, yeah, cool. The music from Dragon Quest III. I love the music from Dragon Quest III. I don't like Koichi Sugiyama's personal beliefs, but you know, we're not here to discuss that today. But if you know anything about Koichi Sugiyama, except, you know, apart from the horrible personal beliefs, you would know that he's greatly influenced by Bach. So see, there's Dragon Quest III being all like, "Hi, Dad." I've seen this before. I like to point out in general, though, women drawing comics have a bit of a reputation of bad anatomy, too. I think it really is that. I don't even think it's necessarily a. Women drawn in comics. I thought you meant women artists fall into that or something. But yes, women drawn in comics, especially in Liefeld art, are really badly proportioned. And there are a lot of really great, again, meme images of. Well, there is a blog that is if men in comics were drawn like women in comics, including costuming and poses. And then there are a lot of instances where somebody will like do a deep anatomical dive on what. Yeah, sorry, I misread it. They'll do like a deep anatomical dive on some of these images for like all characters of like what a skeleton would look like if it was in this character that was being viewed at one point, and like some of them are just kind of broken. So you know, you want to be careful, and we're going to talk about like rule breaking, but there's rule breaking and then there's like bone breaking. You want to break rules, you don't want to break bones. Let's say that's the rule of your characters when you're doing drawings. But, you know, but we do want, and that's why we want to study the fine art aspects of these things, so and do these fine art exercises so that we can master our digital art. Because, you know, again, we conflate skill with programs with artistic knowledge, and it's not really the case. I know lots of people who are good at digital art that are not great artists, and you see how their digital art suffers because they don't understand like the proportions of things. So there's again a bias towards software usage, and I think we generally want to get over that. Again, these are capitalized from old things, so don't think I made a bunch of like snarky sketches. This is snark that has existed for a while, but when digital artists don't know art, bad things can happen. And technically, this wasn't even digital art; it's just like art composited digitally. But you want to avoid this stuff. So let's talk about digital art and art. The question is, what kind of art is it? And how do we master these elements of style? And how do we understand style so that we can make the most effective imagery we can? And that's really what we're here to talk about. So again, I want you to get over a few things. I want you to understand the connections of the art you're making to the art that has existed for thousands of years. And I want you to, yes, you should have a style, like kind of a home style where it's like, if I'm just going to draw for myself, what does it look like? But I also want you to understand what it means to explore styles. Because the other thing that you're going to get caught in too is and this might have happened in your I try to let it not happen when I teach 3D, but it's going to happen as you continue on in 3D stuff, especially. There is a bias towards photorealism, and I don't think that's healthy. And I want you to understand that photorealism is a style among many. It is not like a sign of correctness or what is right or wrong. It's a style. It's a style that I think people lean on in 3D art because that also is like related to understanding of the rendering software, and that's fine. But you can also still explore styles. And same thing with like the discussion. And again, like this is something that I've seen a lot of young artists do. This is something that like when I was in architecture school, people would do. There was very like hand drawn versus computer, and you want to avoid that too. And I say that as somebody who is like Mr. I know 3D Studio Max, and that's my thing. In college and grad school, whereas a lot of people were like honing their hand drafting. But like me as 35-year-old me, who looks back at that and is like, what an idiot, understands that, having had to do a bunch of professional contracts and having been in the position to dictate a bunch of projects independently, there's sometimes where like to get a style or to get a certain style, you need to incorporate hand-drawn something, or even like maybe to be experimental or to have a certain aesthetic, you want to incorporate traditional media. All of that is okay. So like don't burn your bridges is really what I'm saying. Anyway, so let's talk about like what art style even is, first of all. And again, let me know, good discussion so far. Please let me know what your experiences with style are. Again, especially since you are the people who are in that younger group who are possibly even experimenting with establishing a style. What are your thoughts on this? I want to know. Let me know how how you're feeling about this kind of thing in your journey right now. I'm going to keep talking because, again, no dead air. But so what is an art style? It's a distinctive manner which permits the grouping of related works into distinct categories. Now, that why is that important to know? Like, it's one of those things where you, as an artist, you kind of know what this is, but you don't necessarily maybe have the wording to, like, an academic wording. So why is that important? It's important to understand the nuances of art styles so that you can communicate effectively when you are either arguing for or establishing your own art style. So, if you have many artists working in an art style, you might call that an art movement. So that is, like groups of artists often together in one place exploring like one particular style. That's called an art movement. And then if multiple works appear with similar style in a short period of time, and this can occur through an art movement of several like related artists who are aware of each other, or it can occur in several artists like, disparate from one another that don't know each other or geographically located away from each other. You would call that a zeitgeist. So like when you hear the phrase "that is in the zeitgeist," that means that there are works that have some common element. You see this a lot when you see things where it's like, isn't it weird that three unrelated movies about similar topics came out at one time? That would be considered in the zeitgeist. There was just something. You hear this a lot, like, oh, there must have been something in the air. That's what that is. So, style comes from a good way to understand style is to understand genre. And I know what you're thinking. Genre is like, oh, if it's a romantic comedy or a comedy or an action movie. Well, that's one kind of genre. Or like, a first-person shooter or a platformer. But in fine art, in the between the 17th and 19th centuries, there was a period called the academic art period in France, where art academies, so art schools, controlled the aesthetics and definition of art. And so art from the academy was strictly organized into a hierarchy of genres. So the listing of this, the order of this list on this slide basically is very important, because this is what was seen as the best was on top and the least was on the bottom. And why this mattered was that it's not even just that like you'd get kind of snubbed a little bit if you mainly painted stills life, or animals or landscapes. It also depended on, like, your subject matter depended on what materials and what elements you according to the genre style you were allowed to put in your image. And it also depended on, like, it also dictated what canvas size. So even down to the actual like materials of your painting, you were considered allowed to put in your painting. So history paintings were for those giant wall-sized canvases, and still life was for like much smaller canvases. And to do anything different was considered controversial. And, last week we looked at character creation. Think about the modern state, and this is why I want you to think about, like, really critically think about and evaluate the idea of photorealism in, like, 3D, is think about what, often students are told is right in digital art. Last week we looked at character creation. One dominant style that you see in visual development in digital art, in character art, is a painterly digital style that we associate with Photoshop a lot. This style has elements of what I wouldn't call realism, because I wouldn't do that, because realism is a actual art movement from like the 19th century. But, let's call it idealism. So, the ideal version of something with like nicely shaded, nicely rendered look. So like an ideal look. They show a rendering style meant to give a high fidelity look. And so that's a style you see a lot. And then you also see stuff like this in modern digital art. you want to have like big epic scenes, with like huge scales and really really sort of escapist imagery. And again, it's rendered in a sort of like as photorealistic as possible, again within like the color palette style. So, and that's not to say it's bad. I'm just saying this is a style. It's not the only style, if that makes sense. So, basically these are history paintings. These are, if we look at the genre system from the 19th century, that's what history paintings were. They were epic scenes, often from history, the Bible, or mythology, that are rendered with, first of all, you would be showing the artist's technical skill because you'd be rendering them as photorealistically as possible. And you could use the best tools, the best visual elements like monumental canvas sizes, nudes, and non-static action. And, if you had any of those things, so if you used a big canvas, or you had a nude figure, or you had like motion or action occurring in your painting, and you were not painting a history painting, you were breaking the rules, and how dare you. And the way that the genre system or the academic system enforced this was basically by making it so that if you broke these rules, you couldn't show in galleries, which is how you got noticed and how you made money. So, it's kind of the same situation you see people in now, is like if you're trying to get a big studio job, like not so much in animation, definitely in game art. If you're trying to get a job at certain types of studios, you're expected to kind of be according to their academy style. And even when you see AAA artists, when they go off and do their own indie stuff, they usually just like break this style completely. That's why you don't see a lot of like indie things, even if it is from a person who used to work at like BioWare or something. You see much more experimental things. That's why I think it was former BioWare people that made what's that game? Banner Saga, that looks like Evan Earl's artwork from Sleeping Beauty. I think they were BioWare, but they were former AAA. And, again, like you see somebody breaking completely off from that specific AAA style to go do something else. So that's usually the first thing you see go when a game developer goes indie, is like the photorealism. So artist Gustave Courbet challenged this tradition by painting the funeral of his commoner uncle, a scene, traditionally utilized for what are called genre paintings. So like a much lower set of like type of painting than a history scene. So this canvas was 24 feet by 10 feet. That's usually like history paintings only. You cannot use that to paint normal people. He did that, and it caused a bunch of monocles to fall in champagne glasses and pearls to be clutched. And, what you see, the point I'm getting at is, like, let's look at this timeline of art styles. The dots on the line are centuries, and the colored lines coming off of the central line are art styles. Look how many colored lines there are for centuries. Usually have like one or two art styles, and between the 16th and the 17th century, like that's a little spicy right there. There's like kind of sort of three, but once you hit the 19th century and you get into realism, which is what Courbet would be, romanticism and realism, then suddenly we're off to the races, and people are just making all kinds of different things. It starts with realism, and then suddenly you start spinning off into nature, light, mood school, pointillism, fauvism, art nouveau, modernism, folk art, pop art, all of this stuff. Artists start getting really crazy. They're on those steroids. and you start to see things really get become much more diverse. So that's something really cool, and you start seeing people really be experimental with art. And you know, if you're thinking like, what does this have to do with any of my animation or games work? Well, one, it's a cautionary tale because I want you, I want you to experiment with these things. I want you're in school and you have incredible freedom. You may not realize it, but you have incredible freedom right now to um, you have incredible freedom to experiment and to be wild and with your art. The other stuff, that's none of my business, but like with your art, uh, you can do whatever you want, and that's the only time in your life, if you go work in a big studio system, that may be the only time in your creative life that you get to do that, and I want you to take advantage of it. So don't think that you must be stuck in an academy style. I think I challenge you, I encourage you to be out there and wild with your the styles you experiment with, and take risks, because not only is that going to show off you are a better artist when it does come time to get jobs, but you'll also have a lot more creative fulfillment and be able to make cool things you're super proud of. So case in point, who knows like the artists that did all of these paintings? Can you tell me which artist did these paintings? I'm gonna wait and cool off my kind of recollect myself here. Any guesses in the chat? Yes. Okay, so everybody's saying Picasso. Well done. This is kind of a trick question. These are all Pablo Picasso. And Pablo Picasso is known for going through very specific stylistic changes throughout his career, and down to the point where you can talk about these as periods. So you have the blue period and the rose period, all the way into his postmodern work, and then his like other sketch style work, his cubism and things like that. And the cool thing about Picasso is that he has a style for a little while, but then he really is just kind of playing and exploring and learning. He's always learning. There's a quote by him when he started doing pencil drawings. He said, it took me longer to learn how to draw like a child than it did for me to learn how to do photorealism. And but he's always trying new things and learning, and that's something that I wanted to bring up in when we talk about art styles, and let's suddenly get super real about this. So what does this all this mean for like your commercial animation work too? So one, again, be experimental. You have the freedom to do that right now, and I hope you take it. But as an artist, it's also important to play with style for employment reasons. The first, so again, one, having the ability to adapt to styles it makes you more likely to be hired. Because unless you're a famous artist, people are not going to come to you for your style. I know that that's hard to fathom, and hard to be told, but you're not necessarily going to be approached for your style. You could be. I'm not saying you can't be, but more likely than not, you will be approached for your ability to draw, or your maybe like the subject matter you draw. So a good example was last year I illustrated a colleague's book about like architectural principles and game design, which is like kind of my thing, right? That's like a thing that I'm known for is architecture and game design. So he's working on something related and was like, "Hey, could you help me do these drawings?" And I was like, "Sure." But he said, that friend of ours, Jason, he already started doing some illustrations for the book, and I'd like them to be cohesive. So can you match Jason's style? So he sent me some of Jason's drawings, and like, no problem, let's go. And I looked at them, came up with some composites, sent them to them, and they were like, "Yeah, looks good." And I had to adapt to the style that had already been established in the book, while also using my particular background to like compose the images, if that makes sense. So it's like I was approached to create the subject matter of the images, but the style was already predetermined, and I had to fit that style. So if you can only do a single style, that lowers your ability to be able to participate in projects. So like if I had not been able to adapt to that style, we'd either have to, put something in that says like, emphasize the change in art styles, or I would not be able to participate in the book. So when you get a job or where you apply to jobs, you'll often be given an art test, which is where you have to produce a specific set of images in a short period of time. Usually it's a little bit of a crunch, and that's supposed to see how you do under a deadline. And these are used to evaluate if an artist can produce art, again, under tight deadlines, but also if you can produce work in the studio's preferred style. So here are two images from art tests, one for Nickelodeon and one for Dungeons and Dragons. And on the Sam Kaiser's blog, where he talks about his D&D artwork, he actually mentions that he did not get this job. So, this is something that again, it's a subjective thing, but this is one aspect of like why you'd want to have the ability to do things with art styles. So here's another image. Pardon that I just kind of, it's hard to access these particular images online, but I have the book. So another reason to be flexible with style, and a more fun one, is that by not being a servant of only one style, you can, and kind of like leaning on an art style is a very deviant art online community thing. Like that's a thing that you really saw people focusing more on when you could be that online like art personality. But traditionally the idea is like you'd have an art style, but you'd want to learn how to do a few different things. Again, there's the hiring thing, but a more fun one is you can play with styles project by project and make the style a selling point of a work. So let's take comic book artist David Mazzucchelli, for example. So here's one of his sample pages that he produced when trying to get a job at DC Comics in the 70s and 80s. So, this would probably be like a more native style to him. And he's showing off like, how he would compose a page for Batman. And so he was eventually the artist on the legendary Batman Year One. So if you know this comic at all, you know that it's drawn in a sort of retro 40s noir style, meant to evoke the early years of Batman comics, even though the actual Batman comics from that time period look nothing like this. But it gives you the impression of the 40s. But this looks like way better than those comics looked. So he didn't just use the style of his sample pages, and his style of the sample pages is very much in the zeitgeist of like what a DC Comics page in the like 70s and early 80s looked like. But if you look at Year One, it has this sort of weird timeless quality because it is evoking this older style. So his art style for this comic was a huge departure from that, but in a good way. He went with a look that leaned, because he's going for noir, He leaned heavily on distinct ink brush strokes and big swaths of black, especially for Batman's cape. And if you take some time to look at this, you can see like how the curl of hair can just be like a brush stroke, right? If you understand how ink brush pens work. I have an ink brush pen. It's one of my favorite tools, and you get these like big, awesome shadows with it. It's great. But he also specifically based Bruce Wayne on actor Gregory Peck. So again, he's who is again very very active in the 40s and 50s, and he wanted to get that distinct look by evoking these images. So then when you pair it with, and again, material can have aspect on style too, and process can have aspect on can determine elements of style. So, with a specific printing process, you get this really aged comic book look. Even though this was printed in 1986, you get it looks like it's a much older comic, and that really drives home this idea that this is Batman's origin story. And we all know, Batman is this character from like the 30s and 40s. So that gives a specific mood and feel to the work, which I think is really effective. I like this comic a lot. So to stay on Batman for a second, this is where I talk about fine art and Batman. This is my fine art and Batman lecture. One of my favorite comics of all time is Batman: The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. So this comic gets a lot of flack from like armchair internet critics and Reddit people for its visual style, which frequently uses like exaggerated elements. So Batman's cape in this image is like very like it's huge. It's a tarp that you'd put over like a car size, and that makes no logical sense. But the other thing that gets frequently talked about is like the magically expanding Wayne Manor, because the size of which changes almost seemingly panel by panel in some issues. But the thing that people are failing to understand when they look at that and they talk about that is that Sale is not an artist who illustrates scenes literally or for whom logical consistency is an issue. This is a style. These are design decisions. And that's the thing about style, is that they are design decisions that you make of how a thing should look or be. Again, break rules, not bones. But, you want to show a mastery of the basic elements, but so again, composition, anatomy, proportion, but you can play with these elements in ways that create certain effects and moods. So for example, like these are representational graphic works which use blocks of colors to create moods and exaggerated elements to make you focus on concepts or characters. So the idea of Batman's cape being super huge is supposed to give you this idea of like power and strength. Or the ever-expanding Wayne Manor is supposed to make you understand how lonely Bruce Wayne feels. Or, the sort of like busyness of like the shot of Calendar Man and Batman on the left. First of all, you understand that these characters are in two different rooms, even though they're physically next to each other. Calendar Man is in his cell at Arkham behind glass. Not only is that emphasized because his fingers are mashing up against the glass, but he is under bright, high contrast light, which seems to be like fluorescent lighting, top-down fluorescent lighting, and his madness is conveyed through just like the busyness of all the newspaper clippings. Whereas Batman is in the dark, he's in the shadows, his contrast is much lower compared to Calendar Man's like very stark black and white. And then, Poison Ivy on the right, you're supposed to get the like hypnotic effect of when she has somebody under her spells the wrong word, hallucinogenic neurotoxin is the more apt word, but like when somebody's sort of under her thrall, she seems to be the only thing that matters. So the frame on the right has this, her face is in that image, but they don't draw the contour of her jawline. She is supposed to be just sort of this like atmospheric effect. And by doing that, by abstracting her, you get a sense of her power and her influence. But again, some people are like, that's not anatomically correct. Not anatomically correct, because remember, break rules, not bones. But that's not like realistic. That's what style's about. You can break like what realistic rendering is, because like here's an example of the opposite of like why total realism can be bad. So here's an image from the movie The Lost World in 1925, which is based on the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle book. And the thing about this movie is that the dinosaurs are so basically it's like dinosaurs get to London and smash stuff. That's the movie. And so it's like one of the first monster movies. And the monster or the dinosaurs are rendered scientifically accurate to the knowledge they had of dinosaurs at that time. So everything is at their like proper size, which ends up with a bunch of shots of like the Brontosaurus stomping around London not looking that intimidating because, it's at realistic size. And how scary is this really? Versus King Kong from only a few years later, where they seem to have learned from some of these flubs in The Lost World, where the important thing in every scene and every shot was that Kong is supposed to be front and center, and he is supposed to be the biggest thing in the room and supposed to be the most terrifying he can be. What that results in is if you pay really close attention to him, his size is, I think, at one point stated to be about 24 feet tall. But if you actually were to try to pay attention to the scale of him, he goes between 24 feet to 40 feet to hundreds of feet. So here's, an example, and I've circled the actress for reference, but you see when they're on Skull Island, I think it's Skull Island, when they're on the island, Kong seems much smaller, still very big, but like much smaller compared to humans than when he is like on top of the Empire State Building. And that is because we are the directors are emphasizing the mood of Kong as opposed to the reality of Kong. But that made for a much better, well-received, well-remembered movie. And then, and I can say this as somebody who, like, here's an example of my own art versus artist thing from last year, speaking of, like, online stuff. But, sometimes, like, it's nice to do stuff in different art styles just to alleviate boredom. I know that, like, when I work on a game or a project with one style, usually my next game or project is like of the complete opposite style, because I'm like, I don't want to. I think Stephen King put it really well when, if you were stuck on a desert island and the only thing you had to eat was blueberries, and then you got rescued from the desert island, and somebody says, "Hey, do you want a piece of blueberry pie?" You'd be like, "No, thanks." So that's the thing about like doing these kinds of artworks, is if you can adapt to style, you're hireable, but you're also able to, make really cool creative choices, but then also just kind of not be bored with one style of drawing. So how do you choose art styles? Like here's some questions to ask for yourself, because this isn't, except in situations where you are trying to work for somebody and you are trying to match that like studio style. The goal is, let's put it this way for your creative work in this class. or in other classes that you have, when you try to think about what style it should be, again, don't just assume like, oh, I must do photorealism. Um, like if you are taking the time to choose an art style, how do you choose an art style? What's the right or wrong answer? Well, the nice thing is that there is no right or wrong answer. That can be very intimidating for many young artists, but think about this. What is the feeling you want to evoke? Are there familiar works whose style might influence your own that you like, that you admire, that maybe you want to try the style of? If somebody said Song of the Sea is so pretty, then make something like a thing you could do is like make a work influenced by the visual style of Song of the Sea. And a lot of people get hung up in like originality, but as long as you're not remaking that thing, really what you're doing is you're playing in a style, you are influenced, that's called precedent. And again, the animation's not so bad about it. The game art is horrible with it, where people don't understand precedent in the game field. They think it either has to be like so beholden to things that came before that it's like a work of, oh, I'm doing a game that is like an NES game, but it's my own NES game, but it's a lot like Mega Man. It's a tribute to like these direct tributes. So it either has to be like slavishly devoted to its influences, like, and I love Shovel Knight, but Shovel Knight is like, there's Shovel Knight back there. But, it's a Mega Man game. And it wants to be. Or you get the thing where people are like, oh, you made a game that is only kind of a little bit like this other thing. How dare you? That's not a thing in most areas of art and design. Superman for All Seasons, also by Loeb and Sale, wears its influences on its sleeve. It is like when you're in Smallville, it is grabbing you by the collar, shaking you and saying, this looks like Norman Rockwell. And that's because it's trying to, again, it's using precedent to evoke it's using precedent from a culturally understood and accepted artist style to evoke an emotion, which is supposed to be, again, Norman Rockwell, mid 20th century painter, evoked scenes like what you would call genre paintings of like everyday American life. And you'd often see these on like the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. There is a folksy Americana to that. And if you're in like Smallville, Kansas, in a Superman story, that's what you want. Somebody says the colors are so fun and whimsical. Yes, and the color choices, we'll get to color in a second, but the colors mean something. When you have this rainy scene, there's lots of sort of earth tones and cool tones of these people in the rain, sort of the everyday folks, and then brightly colored Superman flies overhead. I mean, one of the characters is literally in these panels saying, I see hope. And that's what that's supposed to do. It's supposed to, like, he's contrasting the drab everydayness of, his surroundings. And if you actually watch the Richard Donner Christopher Reeve Superman movie from the late 70s, they do a similar thing. Smallville is very pastoral and lots of wide angles, and then Metropolis is sort of like drab color New York. Oh, sorry, I was just catching up. Yeah, the Little Nemo panel, yes, we went up, like, let's turn these colors up to 11. But thank you. That's awesome. That means it's working. the art's doing what it's supposed to do. And so sometimes you choose an art style based on, like, do you want to experiment with stuff? Like I said, I mean, somebody said Song of the Sea is so pretty. Why don't you, like, I don't know, spend a project in Song of the Sea's art style. Like, make it your own project, but you're allowed to be influenced by stuff. That's how art works. And you might have a good time, you might hate it, but, that's why you do those, like, art style challenges, because you kind of, like, try a style on. or maybe you want to like be kind of wild and experiment with your own thing completely. And again, one reason not to throw away fine art or traditional art is like I think some of my most fun. And if I don't have a picture of it on here. Well, okay. In the upper left, so that's my game, Laziski's Revenge. All of those figures in it actually exist. Like that, those are scanned paper cutouts, and that gives like a materiality to the game that it wouldn't have if it wasn't. If I just did it with like vector art or something. I wanted it to have a gritty materiality like paper rather than just be like super clean. I know it doesn't read this far out, but if you play the game on a full screen, you can see that it has like a paper texture, and that adds like some nice feel, like visual texture to it. And there's another game that I had that I don't have on here that is it's called Zup, and it's another one of my like made it with another company and then the company folded, and then so the game's not accessible. But I was told by the producer that they wanted it to look like somebody asked, do we have a window for Little Nemo's release? We are putting it up on Kickstarter early next year, and then we're gonna be able to have a firm schedule of actual release once we see what happens with a Kickstarter. So with Zup, the producer for the game approached me and said, well, we want it to look like South Park. And not so much like look like actual South Park, but look like it has the, cutout element of South Park, like how it looks like paper cutouts. And I was like, well, how much do you want that? Because this was when I was working on like my zombie game, and I was doing a lot of 3D for it, and I was like just tired of 3D, and had done 3D for the game that's on the top middle, Swarm, and I just wanted to do something that was not 3D, was not polygons. So I was like, well, what if I went to a craft store and literally bought a bunch of craft foam sheets and made these characters out of craft foam? And I still have them around here somewhere. I should like actually put them in a frame or something like that. So I think they're in like a bag. But the like it created a really cool look, and I may have to post something about that in the Discord. But it was I took these real materials, made actual pieces, and then scanned them and then turned them into digital art assets. But it gave the game a really appealing, fun look that I'm still actually really happy with. So sometimes you just want to experiment with visual elements or materials or composition. Please do post it to the Discord. But there can still be a signature of you in there, even if you are adapting to styles. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. So we've also talked about color scripts. So if you don't remember, color scripts are, they're either like a scene if you're making something short, like a storyboard of a scene if you're making something short, or a storyboard of like a shot from each scene of a movie. But they track like what are the color choices that occur over the course of the entire piece. And the reason you do it is that you are showing like what are the moods of a scene or a piece. And so it's like this one kind of goes from cool night but a little creepy to like full on, creepy horror. And so it goes from like blue to sort of like, bright lights, and then it goes to, green and glowy and intimidating, with like strong overtones of like green white. And you see even like a little color strip in the corner that maps that in a very literal way. Color is part of your style. Because one thing you want to understand is that just because you have access to every color doesn't mean you need to use every color. So here's an example from the game industry. So there's this article which I think everybody should read called "Bleep the Super Game Boy" by Christine Love, and it's a really great article by this game developer who worked on a game, like an indie game years later, but it was for the Super Game Boy, or either for or in the style of Super Game Boy. So Super Game Boy, if you don't know, was this attachment for the Super Nintendo where you could put it into the Super Nintendo and then take a Game Boy cartridge, which is black and white, and you'd put that into the Super Game Boy, and then you could play Game Boy games on Super Nintendo, and it would colorize them for you. So what happened was, and some games had special color palettes because of like the ways that color was done on Game Boy that I'm not even going to get into right now. But the point being, Game Boy could still only show 4 colors, so you had to be creative with color palettes. And for non-static elements, you couldn't like use trickery to make it. If something had lots and lots of colors in a screenshot, that meant everything in the screenshot was still. But if something had to move, it had to be low amounts of color. But what they did was you saw developers who used this really well getting creative with their color palettes and creating very moody color palettes. So here in World Heroes Jet 2, or World Heroes 2 Jet, I don't know the ordering, and basically an SNK fighting game, you have like this sort of nighttime city scene. Everything's like blue-purple, like different shades of blue-purple. And when you match that against the like actual arcade version of this game that it's like a port of, there's lots of color and those are really impressive sprites, but it's not really expressive. It's just a visual. And that may not be your goal. You may want to show all the colors you can, but if you want to have moody expression, you can play with your color style. Same thing with like if we look at the color palette for Donkey Kong 94 on the Super Game Boy. Forest scene, it's a lot of like browns and greens. A city scene, purples and yellows. And what's interesting about that is that now you're playing with the color wheel and you're showing like, so browns and greens, those are complementary colors. Complementary colors being, if you don't know, colors on the opposite side of the color wheel from each other, that if you put them together, they look nice together. They complement each other. So red and green are highly complementary, or like anything in the green range and the orange red range are very complementary. Red and green isn't used more because it has also a cultural association with Christmas, but purple yellow is another really effective. I use that for my company, Purple and Yellow. That's my studio's color palette, Pie for Breakfast. So, understanding even just basic color theory lets you do some really cool stylistic things. Same thing with like all of these colors have mood associations. So like red is very aggressive, or orange is very like actiony, but green can be relaxing and pastoral. Blue can either be cold or it could be relaxing. Purple is often very regal. So you want to understand how these things work. This is actually a picture from a carpet website, and I thought it was actually a really great color wheel image because the color, the images on the carpet shown kind of show the mood that they are. So like red, you see it's almost like fire and lava. Green is like nice leaves, and blue is like serene water. So color can be a big part of your stylistic choices. So I talked about signatures. You can still, no matter what you're doing, do lots of like little signature bits. Richard Williams, who wrote the Animator Survival Kit, which is one of your textbooks, he has a great, never quite finished movie called The Thief and the Cobbler, and like it was released several times between 1992 and 1995, but it was sort of like it was in development for like decades, and then they got money to make it but then it went so over budget and so over time that the studio basically like snatched it and took control and then like released it in sort of a not so not so fully realized way, to the point where it's just kind of like not very, those versions are not very good, and they're missing a lot of content that would have really tied it together. So fans have since gone back and like made their own edits of it, incorporating storyboard and animatic footage cut throughout. So the latest one, and the one people consider the best, is the recobbled cut. So like go check that out. It's super entertaining. I mean, it still has elements of like Richard Williams' ways of drawing women and things like that that are not always so great, but you know, he has elements of like signature style where he really liked geometric forms. So even if you're doing a distinct style, you might have something that you lean back on and you have like an element of. Did he do anything with the Beatles? I was waiting for somebody to talk about Yellow Submarine. I don't believe he worked on Yellow Submarine, but you're not wrong in saying that this doesn't look like Yellow Submarine. Vincent Price's character, Zigzag, the Grand Vizier, like basically is a Blue Meanie. He is the Blue Meanie. You know, and I don't even think I need to tell you which character in this series of shots, if you're familiar with he's the blue one, but you know, if you're familiar at all with Yellow Submarine, he stands out pretty immediately. The Blue Meanie, actually, side note, was a super impactful character. There was a cartoon on when I was a kid on Nickelodeon called Ah Real Monsters, and the teacher character of these like monsters in Monster School, the Gromble, was basically also the Blue Meanie. But you know, so like there's little signature touches you can put into your stuff. So how do you, again, let's talk practicality. How do you, if you have a style and you are in the leadership of a project, or if you are hired for a project, how is style communicated to you, or how do you communicate style to other people? You do that through what's called a style guide, which is a set of explicit directions or best practices for drawing and animating characters and or elements of a show. So, you know, here's some pictures from the King of the Hill style guide, down from everything from how to draw Peggy's hair, how characters sit down and stand up, how you're supposed to draw them eating, to like how to draw shingles on roofs, and how to, you know, draw the background so that you are being consistent with the region of Texas that these characters live in. So, you know, this is, you'd be surprised at how many times I've seen somebody do the very, like, not literally, you know, oh, it's Texas, so I did a cactus, but a sort of thing where it's like, oh, it's this, so I drew it that way. And it's like, that's not accurate to what this place looks like. You know, did you not do your research? So again, this is where research is important. So timing and style. Let's talk about timing real quick in the last few minutes. Timing is a part of your animation style. So practice. We talked about Hanna-Barbera and limited TV animation. I was flipping through channels the other day and the Flintstones were on, and I actually like noticed one element of the way that show is done. You know, look at when you look at this animated GIF. So timing and style might be determined by practical elements like your budget. So, you know, they're trying to save money on the Flintstones. So look, only Fred's head moves, the rest of his body is holding. Only Wilma's head moves, the rest of her body is holding. Only Pebble's head moves. You get that they are only animating on each, like, only one part of their body actually animates consistently while the rest of their body holds, and that saves tons of money. So that's part of your style. Are you going for detailed style versus smooth, detailed art versus smoothest? That's that anime thing again, where you have like super detailed anime characters that might just stand stock still in a scene talking to each other. Are you going for a handmade aesthetic in your timing? So there's the animating on twos versus modernity. So like I have the ability to animate on ones and get super smooth. So damn it, I'm going to animate on ones. Modern aesthetic. Or are you trying to do like historical mimicry? Um, you know, Cheap TV style has since been academically turned into a art style called cartoon modern. So maybe you want to play with the cartoon modern, even though it arose from very practical production reasons. Now we're looking at it academically as like a an element of the larger art landscape of the mid 20th century. So, first of all, and I linked this in the Discord. This is a link to a XSheet template, and there's lots of XSheet templates. They're not all one to one. This is just a link to a XSheet. It's not the XSheet to end all XSheets. So it may even look different from this XSheet. But in general, let's talk about what specifically is on an XSheet and what you fill in. Let me know if there's any more questions too. I realize I'm rushing through this last bit, but I want to make sure, again, if there are any questions that I answer them. So how do you work with timing how do you plan out that timing that would be part of your style? First of all, let's document your XSheet properly. Like, here's your scene and animator info. So, scene, sequence, shot, etc., and who's the animator. And when you're working on big projects, you typically want to, mark who did certain pieces of work, down to if you have anything like this where you can write your name, to like if you're working on games in later classes where I'll have you, if you're working with a group, put your initials in the file name for an asset you make. The reason you do that is that so if somebody needs a change done, they know who to talk to. But yeah, here's where you put your info on an XSheet. And first things first is the action column. So this is like where you write down what the actions happening in that scene are. And remember, all of this comes from your script and your storyboard. So it's not like these come out of your brain. This is stuff that you actually already know. So this is where you write down those actions. And, you map them according to where they are on your scene. So here's the time numbers for how many seconds are occurring. But really where you'd want to pay attention and put your actions next to their proper numbers is with this column on the right of it, which is frames. So this is a list of frames. Now, one thing I want you to know, so this is from Eric Goldberg's book on, this is from the actual, and there's more instruction in the Crash Course book, so I definitely say go read that chapter. It's pretty short. But one thing you're going to notice with Goldberg is he's putting little notations in this, and that goes to the idea that, again, this is not like a quiz. I don't want you to stress over this as a quiz. This is a planning document for you. So however you want to put your little notes and your little sketches and your little doodles, and, like he does, he doesn't just let it be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. He puts the digit numbers for 10, 11, 12, 13, 20, 30, etc. for him. So that's okay. Make this work for you. Don't make you work for this, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's your frames. And, by planning things according to frames, and again, there's that little guide that, shows you like, oh, these common actions are generally this many frames. You see, you can start to see like how many seconds things take. If you ever are confused over how many frames something will take, set up a camera and act it out yourself. Shoot yourself doing the thing. So, raising hand to like swat at a fly, set up your camera, raise your hand and swat it at an imaginary fly, and use that for timing reference. That's pretty normal for animators to do. But see, by looking at that, you'll understand how timing according to frames, how actions will be timed according to frames. So like that's where you start to like take notes on this. So generally each action in the action column is next to where the frame where they will be. Let me know if there are any questions. Then there's the dialogue column. There's nothing in here right now because this action has no dialogue, but this is where you'd put like the literal number of sounds of dialogue, and I'll show that to you in a second, according to what frame they'd be on. So you'll see that in another example in a second. Then here's the animation layers. So you see there's like 6 layers here. There's a miscellaneous column for any extra stuff, but usually like here's 5 through 1, and it's organized as 5 is the top layer on that rig, and then the bottom one is the background, and everything in between is like from 5 down to 1. But here it's very simple. There's like Eric on tray 2, Fly on tray 1, and the background. And what is if you look at column 2 where it says Eric, those numbers are showing you, the animator, what frames of the animation there will be drawings for. So that's how you plan these out, is you have the action, and then according to the frames, and then on the right in those animation layers, that's where you're marking down where there will be drawings for that. And you see it's animated on 2s because there's a number on every other frame. And the Fly, you see there's a line and then an X and then another line because the Fly holds from frame 1 to frame 25. And the background holds for the entire animation. So that's how that's notated out. And then lastly, you have a camera column, which then, and I'm not going to go into camera notation. I would honestly just be descriptive for yourself. But that's where you just have like your camera, and then the camera just stays in one spot, basically, is what's happening there. So, what you might do for a scene is like, if you were working in Maya and you had camera 1, camera 2, camera 3 set up for different shots. Camera 1 is maybe your establishing shot, camera 2 is a close-up, and camera 3 is maybe like another wide shot. That's where you might, on different frames, say like camera 1 on that frame, camera 2 on that frame, camera 1 on that frame, camera 3 on the next frame. So you can plan that out in that way. Here's an example, again, from Goof Troop. If you see the letters right after the frame column, those are the sounds of the actual dialogue. And then the red ones, the red letters, are the phonemes. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, phonemes are mouth shapes for different sounds. And that's what is marked there, is like, what are the mouth shapes that, Max is going to be animated with on those specific frames. And, that helps you make good looking dialogue. But then, last thing to know to bring it full circle, mouth shapes can be part of your style guide for characters and can be part of your art style. So that's it. That was a lot. Any questions? Thanks for sticking around. I'm sorry that I'm always late, but I hope you find these informative. I really do. I don't know, any questions? I'm gonna take a drink of water. As you can tell, I'm actually very passionate about art style experimentation. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it makes projects more fun and worth doing when you can play around with the art style a bit. If there are not questions, I will cut off the stream, but thank you for watching, and I will be available for questions on Discord later. later. But otherwise, have a good day. Bye bye.